Have you wanted to use your home equity to pay off debt or improve your house, but found the old way too painful? There's now a new, better option for accessing your home equity. It's called HomePace. Here's the key. It's not a loan, so there's no monthly payments or interest. Instead, HomePace gives you money up front as an investment in your home. That's right, you get money that you can use however you want without the burden of monthly payments. Then someday when you decide to sell, you share a portion of the gains or losses in your home's value with HomePace. That means if your home's value drops, HomePace takes a loss too. HomePace gives homeowners a better choice to access home equity. No monthly payments, no interest. To get an instant quote, go to homepace.com/quote. It takes less than 5 minutes. That's homepace/quote to get started.
Your favorite band's about to play a sold-out show. You got in.
Over here!
With a friend. And found a spot close enough to see the set list. They're definitely playing your song. When you're with Amex, it's not if it's going to happen, but when. American Express. Don't live life without it.
Hi guys, Sam here, host of the AEW Match Guide podcast. Before we get started on today's episode, I wanted to quickly let you all know that after Double or Nothing 2022, the creation of the second edition of the definitive AEW Match Guide will begin. The first edition sought votes from a diverse group of AEW commentators around the internet wrestling community to collectively rank the greatest matches from the first 2 years of the promotion's history, and that list is what the matches this podcast reviews is based on. For the second edition of the list that will look at matches between Double or Nothing 2021 and 2022, I'm hoping to cast that net even wider, so I'm hoping to get your support. If you're interested in submitting your votes and weren't involved last year, then please reach out to me on Twitter at Sir_Samuel or via email sambrownmedia@gmail.com. And when the time comes, I'll send you out a ballot to get your vote. To celebrate this, for the month of May, we'll be looking at 3 different matches from previous Double or Nothings, and then in the week before Double or Nothing 2022, I'll be hosting a YouTube live stream previewing the pay-per-view. Looking forward to see you all there. That's it for now though, so let's hit the music and get this show on the road. Welcome to the AEW Match Guide podcast, where we deep dive into the best matches in AEW history. Brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network and your host, Sam Brown. Yes, hello and welcome to the AEW Match Guide podcast. I'm your host, Sam Brown. Thank you for joining me. Every week, alongside a special guest, I take an in-depth look at one of the best matches in AEW history, taken from the definitive AEW Match Guide, as ranked by over 30 wrestling commentators from around the internet wrestling community. If you enjoy the show today, you can subscribe and rate it on your podcast app of choice, and make sure you check out all of the other great shows on the Social Suplex Podcast Network that cover all aspects of the world of pro wrestling. My guest today is a podcaster and freelance writer, Bevan Morgan, and we're looking at Kenny Omega versus PAC versus Orange Cassidy, the 3-way AEW World Championship match from Double or Nothing 2021. How are you going today, Bevan?
Very well, my friend. How about yourself?
I'm very well. I'm very interested to talk about this match. It's a unique match type that AEW, we haven't talked about before on the podcast, and AEW hasn't done a lot of. And it's a really interesting moment in both the career of Kenny Omega and I think also for the two people who are in the match as well, PAC and Orange Cassidy. So I'm excited to get going. I'm really glad you picked this match.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I think we're going to have some pretty interesting chat given what you sort of teased before the show started.
Excellent. Just before we get into the actual match itself, Bevan, as I ask all of my guests here on the podcast, how did you get into AEW?
Yeah, I've heard your other guests do this because I feel like I could talk on this for about 2.5 hours. So I'll try and keep it very brief since I've heard that's what everyone else does. I basically got into wrestling in the late 90s, as a lot of other people did. And I was always a real big WCW guy. I didn't really like the WWF very much. I mean, I liked Austin because, how could you not? But what was kind of interesting is I still watched both. It wasn't quite as fiercely tribal as it is now. But basically, when WCW sort of turned to crap, I kind of lost interest for a few years. And I basically just, because I was never really a big WWE guy, and that's all we really got in New Zealand, it was kind of like I would dip in and out and dip in and out and dip in and out. And then I sort of really tried to sort of get back into it around 2014, and that's when I was doing some writing for like What Culture and a couple other websites, I think. But I was just like writing stuff that I hated, because it was like I was just like almost hate watching, because I just really didn't enjoy it. It just wasn't for me. That's not a slight against anyone that likes WWE. I just wasn't enjoying it, and so I was desperately kind of just following. Yeah, I didn't know much about the indies, but I was just following bits and pieces, and then got into New Japan a little bit, just from all the hype and that you're starting to hear and that kind of thing. And and then I think similar to what yourself and a lot of people said, you were sort of introduced to the Elite via that, like Kenny Omega and things like that, and followed it from there. And basically, I just was, I was big on AEW when they were just a t-shirt company, because even like it just felt like, oh my god, I can't believe this might actually be happening. There might be another big promotion. Doesn't have to be the number one promotion, but just a good solid wrestling promotion. And so I've been pretty hooked since Double or Nothing, I suppose.
Excellent. I do have a quick question for you, just out of curiosity. What is wrestling like in New Zealand? Obviously, I live in Australia, you live in New Zealand, the opposite side of the world to the hotbeds of wrestling in America and the UK. And it is very niche here in Australia. But like New Zealand, you guys punch above your weight in terms of what you produce. Like Jay White, obviously Bad Luck Fale has the dojo there and has produced a number of wrestlers that have gone on through to New Japan. Toni Storm is actually from New Zealand, moved to Australia when she was quite young. There's a lot of cultural exchange between our two countries. But I am curious what wrestling is like in New Zealand.
Yeah, it's a really good question, because wrestling historically was very popular. It's kind of funny. I was doing research for something else for my work, and I was looking up just some like theatre listings at this theatre in Hamilton, which is where I'm from, and they had Ed the Strangler Lewis wrestling. I was like, wait, what? And it was a big thing. And then sort of through the sort of 60s and 70s, you actually had NWA wrestlers coming and stuff like that. And in the 70s, there was a program called On the Mat that was like primetime television on the one TV station that there was, and you had Bret Hart come out for that before he was even in the WWF. So it's always had like this sort of popularity. Today though, it's I suppose it's WWE is one thing. Like WWE is still very popular, I think, amongst children, and it sort of has in the sort of I suppose it's nerd culture. I'm sure wrestling is nerd culture and we should just embrace it. But I think there's some people that think it should be they think it should be jock culture. But so I suppose there's a bit of popularity there. But it is niche. It definitely, especially if someone sees me in an AEW t-shirt, they'll come up and comment, it's kind of and vice versa. It's kind of like, oh, cool. It's like a secret club almost. And, AEW is pretty mainstream, for wrestling. So I think that might be illustrative. I'm not really, it's popular where it's popular, but I wouldn't say that it's like the biggest thing on earth.
It's funny how that's similar to Australia. This is a wild tangent for the people who are listening, but you're about to get a history lesson from me as well. But just interesting in that in the 50s, 60s, 70s, wrestling was quite big in Australia, and they often in Melbourne they packed out 10,000 people into the festival hall there, and they've got recorded crowds of up to 30,000 people coming to watch. Dusty Rhodes toured Australia. You've got those sorts of guys coming in, like NWA. We've pretty much had an NWA territory here with WCW, World Championship Wrestling. It was Australia's World Championship Wrestling here.
I follow them on Twitter.
But funnily enough, they ended up getting booted off because they were in primetime TV on Channel 9, which is Kerry Packer's TV channel. Kerry Packer being kind of a version of Rupert Murdoch who never went international. Speaking of Australia's, greatest export. Sorry, world.
I was going to say he went international. He came into New Zealand for a while.
But so Packer, he kicked them off because of my other love,
cricket, having the World Series cricket. So that's like the time when cricket exploded and one-day cricket started and led to the death of pro wrestling pretty much here in Australia for a long time. There is a bit of a burgeoning indie scene that has kind of resurrected that, but through the 80s and 90s, like it's really slim pickings because of that. And wrestling has always been on pay TV as well. So it's just not been as mainstream. I know that I had some friends growing up that liked wrestling. That was before I got into it. But certainly beyond WWE here, there's not a whole lot of people. There is a diehard fan base. And, you know, if I wear my AEW shirt out, every now and again, I'll get someone who'll say like, oh, nice shirt, or, oh, do you watch AEW, or something along those lines. But it is really niche here. I just thought that was really interesting how the histories of pro wrestling in our two countries are so similar. And, you know, it's probably had a pretty, like, the effect of what happened in Australia probably caused some of the stuff that happened in New Zealand and vice versa.
Well,
I imagine.
without doubt. And I think what shows that it's niche, I think, actually, but still, you know, as I say, but it is still popular because you go into the warehouse, you know, which is our. So I mean, there's plenty of WWE stuff. It's doing fine.
Yeah. But yeah, WWE packed out the MCG. That's like 60,000 people a couple of years ago.
Yeah, but like no one knows who Jay White is. Do you know what I mean? Like,
how funny is that?
If he could win, you know, the AEW world title, he could sign the AEW, win the world title tomorrow. And like for me, I'm like, that should be in the news, like even just as like the entertainment news. But no, there's no way anyone would know who he is. And you just like, and they do all these, you know, sports awards and stuff, and it's a very typical New Zealand sort of tunnel vision. Because a lot, you know, was it the All Blacks? And it's like, well, they had a crap year. It's like, well, should we just still give it to them anyway? It's like, well, maybe try one of these like really popular international. No, we don't care about them. Like, they don't go on Weebooks. Like, so
the only wrestler who ever makes news here in Australia, funnily enough, who's from Australia, you know, we've got Rhea Ripley, who is a former WWE champion, women's WWE champion, Tony Storm, Jonah Rock. I can't remember Bronson Reed on NXT.
What's Buddy Murphy?
Buddy Murphy, Robbie Eagles. You know, like these days. But the only one who ever gets any mention is Daniel Vidot, who, God, I can't remember what he wrestles as in WWE, but that's because he's an ex-footy player. It's always the headline is ex-NRL player.
That's so good.
It's crazy. I think like he's a jobber or something.
Yeah, sure he is. Yeah. It's like when you said his name, I was like, wait, that name sounds familiar. Who the hell's that? And that might, anyway,
hold on, I'll just quickly Google. I'll find out who he is. Daniel Vidot.
You'd be like me as well, because I'm sure Australia was the same, and we're old, obviously. Like it's really funny when I see people talking about like the old days of like the Monday Night Wars, and they're like, yeah, we'd like watch both and blah blah blah, and I'd be like, man, we got Nitro like 3 months later, and it was like an hour, you know, and WWF was I think a month and a half behind, you know what I mean? Like, and they didn't have all the pay-per-views, like we just had the big four, and it's just something of like, no man, it was a mess. Like you could go to the video store and they'd get in the pay-per-view because they realized the kids were all loving this wrestling thing, and they'd get the video in and it would be ahead of what was on TV. So that's how you got your spoilers. Like we didn't even have the internet, you know. It was like, I was like, it's so quaint. Like, and I was like, these guys talking about like they're watching both at the same time. I'm like, no, they were months apart.
Zion Quinn is Daniel Vidot's WWE name. So
Zion. These names like Zion Quinn, that's a shocker.
I mean, Daniel Vidot's not great. Like if they rolled someone out as Daniel Vidot, I think that would probably or he'd probably be, you know, it'd probably be Vidot.
Vidot.
Okay. Okay. Well, look, I really enjoyed that. So thank you for indulging us, everyone. It was interesting, and it's nice to be talking to someone who's a bit close to my time zone as well.
I was going to say that's like it. Yeah, that's a real geographical and age block off that we've just done. Like,
eventually I'll talk to another Australian. Who knows? Sure, I'll be the final show. Anyway, let's get into the match. We've talked about everything under the sun except that. As I said at the start, we are looking at the three-way AEW Championship match from Double or Nothing 2021. Kenny Omega versus PAC versus Orange Cassidy. As we always do here on the AEW Match Guide podcast, to introduce the match, we will give it its flowers. Dave Meltzer, he gave it 4.5 stars. Cage Match currently have it rated at 8.9. And when we did the match guide back in 2021, the first match guide, it came in 17th. So a match that is held in pretty high critical regard around the traps, but I don't think one that is getting sort of the legacy that some other matches are getting. So we'll dive into why that might be, but also why it was beloved at the time as well. Of course, the build centered around the AEW champion Kenny Omega, who was in the thick of his run as the belt collector at the time, holding the AEW, TNA, and AAA championships simultaneously, giving him 4 belts to parade around with in various guises. Before we get into the specifics of the program that they ran into in the lead up to this match, what did you just think of generally of Kenny Omega's character here at this point, and his position as champion across so many organizations?
Oh, I mean, this is amazing. I loved it. I thought this was so cool. I just love this idea of this just absolute dominant character. I wish he could have got more. I wish he could have done the whole Thanos thing that you saw the memes of. Yeah, I loved it. The way that they built his character at the start, obviously it's been sort of gone over millions of times, but as not being good, like having a really bad run, and then him sort of, after the breakup with Paige, flipping the intensity to 12. And I love that, like, that's sort of that idea that this is what was in him that whole time, was someone like not only the Kenny Omega that was in Japan that everyone sort of talks about as being glory days, but like sort of like another level, Yeah, I loved it. I thought it was amazing.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I remember as a kid, the Australian cricket team was very dominant in the early 2000s. And there's
God, tell me about it.
Well, you could talk about the All Blacks after I finish talking about the cricket team. So, but there's this great picture of them, and they had all these trophies. And as a kid, I just thought it was the absolute coolest thing. And of course, like, there was older people who were like, "Oh, this is bad cricket. They're too dominant. They're too good. They're just beating everyone. It's boring. They're bullies, whatever." But as a kid, I was just like blinded by these trophies that they'd won and just how good they were. And that's, there's something, even as an adult, as a 30-something-year-old now, like when you see that, when you saw Kenny Omega with all of the belts, the various ways he had it, sometimes you'd have someone else holding them up, like the boxers do. When you see a boxer walking to the ring and he's got like 5 different championship belts being paraded around by his lackeys, or, when he's got them draped all on him, or he's lying down amongst all of the belts. It's just such a cool visual. I did think it was interesting. Like, it was impressive that they were able to pull it off. An impressive bit of politicking in a world of pro wrestling where that stuff hadn't really been done, particularly in the recent past. And in the past, that stuff is often wrought with danger and wrought with bad endings. And you can argue, about how this all ended up. We can probably talk about it on a different podcast. But it was impressive that and of note that all these companies were willing to put their trust in Kenny Omega, and particularly in AEW, because obviously he is an AEW wrestler, so they have top billing in these sorts of things. Obviously, if you talk to people who are into AAA or lucha, Mexican pro wrestling, lucha, and I'm not just talking about people who watch Triple Mania once a year like me. I mean, like, people who watch it all the time. They will tell you that belts don't mean as much down there. So it doesn't necessarily mean as much for AAA, and he didn't defend that belt all that regularly. But certainly TNA, the legacy of that company, and it's not necessarily at this point, in the later 2010s, but the legacy of that is that was the first big company to come out of the post WCW world. And so that belt does mean something. And the wrestlers in there are really incredible wrestlers. And it's a company that has a TV deal. It's not nothing that he is holding those belts, and also drawing big pay-per-view numbers as well for them. And I thought that was impressive as well, that, not only was he able to sort of boost business for AEW and have this great visual, but he was able to sort of help TNA along. And, I don't know what TNA's budget looks like, but I know that it would look more flush because they had Kenny Omega wrestling there so often, improving their numbers.
Without question. I mean, I'm trying to think of an analogy from the old days, and I can't necessarily, sort of come up with one. I suppose it would have been like someone from the top card of WCW going to ECW. I know that WWE had a relationship with them, but I feel like that would almost be sort of more analogous, and not, it's condescending to say propping up their television or whatever, but I mean, it is essentially the number one ranked wrestler in the world coming to your promotion. I couldn't imagine how anyone wouldn't jump at that chance and be stoked to have got the rub. Like, a lot of people think that TNA's dead, no, I'd be a bit facetious, but like the thing that I remember people saying at the time, because I was one of the people that used to sort of watch TNA and just couldn't handle it anymore because it was just so awful.
TNA too hard.
Yeah,
I always have a habit of doing that, TNA.
Yeah, and it was just, it just got sad towards the end. But that's the thing, is it didn't end, and then suddenly people were like, and I'm like, why is he on the Impact? And they're like, oh, it's good now. And so I started watching it a bit, I was like, yeah, it's good. Like, this is not what it used to be. And so I'm curious to know, just like, there must have been plenty of people like me that would, never, like, A, thought it was dead, or B, had no interest in going back there and been like, oh, okay, yeah, no, it's, if Kenny's going to be there, that's a pretty solid seal of approval, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, like, just speaking personally, they got my $30 a couple of times, and they've never got it before. And I know there's plenty of people like that. They haven't really got it since either, because I didn't like anything else that they were doing at the time. But, they had a chance to impress me because I bought a pay-per-view because I wanted to watch Kenny Omega wrestle for these other belts. And not every wrestler has a fan base that will follow them like that, as loyally as Kenny Omega. So, yeah, it's an impressive bit of business, even beyond, like the character, this like incredible, arrogant, but also kind of like cartoonish character. Like he's like an anime boss in terms of like almost the goofiness, but also the intensity as well. Kenny Omega in all of his pomp is a really cool character, but also, a mover of business, I think. And there's numbers to support that as well.
Yeah, it's amazing that we have people trying to pretend otherwise. Like, you're allowed to, you might not like AEW or whatever, like, but
I don't even like Kenny Omega.
Like, yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, there's plenty of wrestlers that I'm not particularly fond of, but can acknowledge have done really good business or were very influential.
You acknowledge them for that, do you?
Yeah. Oh man, that's Anyway, but like, it just seems silly that you'd even have to like. I was thinking about this watching this match. Actually, I might be jumping ahead. I won't go to any specifics, but like watching the match itself, I'm like, the worst thing Jim Cornette has ever done is convinced a bunch of people that like he's some like really crazy high flyer or something. And I'm like, I was like watching, I was like, I feel like Kenny Omega should be Jim Cornette's favorite wrestler. Like, he takes it so seriously. What? Like,
he wrestled a blow up doll and a girl like.
I know, but it's and that's the thing, isn't it? It's like passes, because I'm like, if you're watching that, I'm like, this is exactly what you want, Jim. This is meticulously planned to get the absolute most psychological advantage out of everything. It's incredibly stiff. They're doing these incredible technical moves. There's very few dives from Omega anyway. PAC's another story, but like, it's just one of those things. I'm like, I was watching, I was like, I feel like he should love Kenny, and now he just, and he probably does, but he can't. Like, it's good business to hate him.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, there's people who, I don't know, for whatever reason, Kenny Omega just rubs them like sandpaper. But he is not the only wrestler in this match. Speaking of wrestlers who rub other people like sandpaper, Orange Cassidy is also in this match, but also PAC as well. Just more generally, what did you think of both PAC and Orange Cassidy at the time of this match?
Well, I thought definitely more of Orange Cassidy, to be honest, mainly because of just by the bad luck of the pandemic. PAC hadn't been around as much in the preceding year, whereas Orange Cassidy had kind of been, as part of his story, his long-term story, sort of been pushed to the moon. I like Orange. I love the two elements to it. I like the idea of it being this like meta sort of self-reflexive thing, which is just kind of funny. But then I also love the element that in kayfabe, it's his whole shtick is like a way to put off wrestlers and to get under their skin. And he's picked his moments and stuff. I love that. I think that's just something unique, like that I hadn't seen before. PAC, I mean, PAC's awesome. It's just, and I do actually think his presence was kind of, I mean, there were a lot of presences missing in 2020, obviously, because it was, things were a bit crazy. But, he was one that I think was like sort of, that match that these two had at Revolution, that, PAC and Orange Cassidy had at Revolution, I think was like a real, like, oh yeah, this is their moment. They're about to jump in. And then, the pandemic hits and he's stranded in England and things like that. So it wasn't that I didn't like him, because I think he's amazing. I love his character. I love his style. But his momentum had kind of been lost for me just through no fault of his own. So it wasn't, I was just kind of like, okay, well, this will be very solid, knowing what a great wrestler he is. But I wasn't particularly interested in him.
Yeah. PAC is someone who I absolutely adore. I love. One of my favorite wrestling kind of, I don't know if you call it promotion or something, but I loved 205 Live in 2017 and 2018. And PAC was the guy that got me into it in 2017 when he took the championship off Rich Swann, and he had that run as the king of the cruisers. It was awesome stuff, just incredible stuff. And he only went onwards and upwards after he finished up in WWE, went into Dragon Gate, had a giant run there. And then he was on fire at the start of AEW as well, just having great matches, great programs, cutting really excellent promos as well. That's something that I think people underrate in PAC, because he is such a crisp and technical and polished in-ring performer. People underrate his ability on the mic, and like some of the little, 2-minute video packages he's done are still some of my favorite things to go back and look at every now and again. Like when he, says he's a honey badger, and if you think you're hard, have a go, mate. I love it. I love it. But certainly his return at the end, I'm not sure, I can't remember if it was the end of 2020 or the start of 2021. It did leave me a little bit flat. It's like they didn't really know where to fit him. And I think because he does still live in the UK, coming back and going back and forth has really robbed him of momentum, because he can't have a solid push because he'll be there and gone. So it's difficult to book him just through the realities of travel. And so coming into this match, it's like, yeah, I know that PAC is going to be great in this match, but I certainly wasn't, at the time, he wasn't in a position where you're thinking, this is a guy who could legitimately dethrone Kenny Omega. Whereas, 2020, just before Revolution, they had an Iron Man match that was very closely fought. And the idea of it was that PAC was Kenny Omega's equal. And by the time they walk into this, you can, even though part of the build, as we'll get into, is that Kenny Omega sort of doesn't really want to have another one-on-one match with PAC, you don't, even though they're saying that, you don't feel it. I don't think anyone felt it. Even though that's what they were trying to say and communicate across. And as he said, with Orange Cassidy, like, yeah, you kind of put it perfectly there. He had that great match with PAC, had a really good series with Chris Jericho, which I thought really elevated him. And then he was an integral part in the Best Friends, Kip Sabian and Miro story. Even though that kind of did drag on and drag out a little bit, he was, I don't think he was really damaged by that. I think it was other parts of the act that were sort of almost irreparably harmed in that one. He kind of came out of that okay, particularly given that he got the song. He got the song from the Pixies, Where Is My Mind, at the end of it, which sort of was a big payoff for it. And I don't know, for me, that felt like a bit of a level up for him as well. Not necessarily putting him on the level of Kenny Omega, as he said. If we want to move into the actual feud itself, it really sort of kicked off when Kenny Omega was doing an interview at Blood and Guts, and Orange Cassidy sort of walked out, and Kenny Omega gave him a real dressing down on the mic, and that put into motion a title eliminator match between Orange Cassidy and PAC, who at the time both had high singles ratings, which Kenny then interfered in, hoping to ruin both men's chances of facing him, with the subtext being he didn't really want to face PAC. And instead, it was announced that since there was no winner, both men would be facing Kenny at Double or Nothing in a three-way match. What did you think of the build for this match?
There's not much to it, really, is there?
No.
It's one of, sometimes, one of the fairer criticisms, I think, of AEW is that sometimes things are rushed and there's a few too many things going on at once, and things don't necessarily get the attention that they deserve nor require. And I think this is just one of those examples. I think it's to say we all knew. It's hard, isn't it? Because we all knew really where the story was going, and so we knew it wasn't changing hands. So how much effort do you put into something when the audience is that smart that you're not really going to trick anyone into falling for it completely? So how much, I don't know. It's just I wouldn't envy it, but at the same time, I thought they've definitely done better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. As much as I said, we talked about how much of a big deal Kenny Omega was at the time and felt like at the time, like this match felt like a throwaway match, really, for me. The build-up was lazy. I kind of liked the psychology of it with, as I said, Kenny trying to get out of a one-on-one match with PAC. But because you didn't really feel that PAC was on his level because his momentum had been so stalled, like you knew that he was a great wrestler and everything, but you didn't feel like he was on the level of someone who could credibly challenge Kenny Omega for the championship if given a one-on-one situation. You didn't feel the peril, and you didn't really have the emotional want for PAC to get that one-on-one match. And I guess that's probably why they included Orange Cassidy in that, because he's someone who's beloved, but we don't really, he's even further down from that thing, particularly when Kenny Omega is doing a program like the Belt Collector. He's just not going to be losing to Orange Cassidy, and that's, it does just make this match. It felt a bit rushed, it felt a bit thrown together, but they're still doing good little promo segments for it. There's good video packages. It didn't leave me wanting to see, I wasn't buying Double or Nothing because of this match. I was,
No, yeah.
But then again, as you said, we didn't need Double or Nothing. Didn't need this to be an absolute can't miss match.
Well, this isn't the main event of the card.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's the opener for the actual main event, which is the Stadium Stampede. And I'm just sort of jumping it, probably ahead again, but I feel like they kind of. It'd be interesting. I thought they kind of used that to their advantage once the match sort of actually started. It was almost like they knew that's what people were thinking, so kind of wanted to lull them into low expectations. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then blow them out of the water. But yeah.
Yeah, look, they certainly had a challenge on their hands when they got into the ring on the night, and that's where we'll go to the match itself. PAC is, unless you've got anything further you want to say about
I should have just waited to say what I just said till you said that next sentence before I interrupted you, and we would have been jumping ahead. So,
it is all good. PAC is out first, of course. Orange Cassidy, he gets a big pop when he comes out to Where Is My Mind. I can't remember the exact timeline of it, but I feel like this was just recently when he finally got that music. Great song, absolute banger of a song. I love that song. And I loved it before he got it, and him getting it is, I don't know, it's just like a perfect little weird twist. It's kind of a weird song, and it does some weird things melodically, which I don't know, I think fit Orange Cassidy very well. Especially, and also just the refrain, Where Is My Mind, as well. it's very Orange Cassidy, very on brand.
100%. It's like it was written for him. It's just, I first heard it in Fight Club, of course I did, because I'm old. And yeah, it's as you say, you summed it up perfectly. It's so him that you could have convinced me if I'd never heard it that was actually designed for him.
Yeah.
It's also just licensed songs are fun anyway. The crowd loves the licensed song because they recognize it, and so it just gets a pop regardless.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. As we saw it WrestleMania with Pat McAfee coming out with Seven Nation Army, what a masterstroke. Like, I mean, that guy is the smartest guy in the world. Pick the song that everybody knows the chant for already and walk out to it. Brilliant. Smart man. Very smart man. And what an awesome moment as well. Like a whole stadium seeing that. Anyway, finally, Kenny comes out and he's, as I said, draped in the gold. It's an iconic image of this run, him walking out with the AEW belt around his waist, TNA belt around his shoulder and chest, and then holding the AAA and Impact belts in each hand. What a cool image as the fireworks go off.
Yeah, it really sums up what was so exciting about that show, that image, because it is that return to, hey, we're getting out of here. It's like, this is our last show here for a while, and we actually have crowds back, and we can do things back to normal. And it's just, it's I don't know, it's just that. It kind of just sums up the, such a great image. It kind of sums up the excitement that was in the air, I think, even on my couch in Hamilton,
Yeah. and I love this. Kenny had a lot of different looks throughout his reign as champion. And certainly from the early times, this was my favorite of them. Like, he had the white on, and white, black, and gold is just such a good look. He had gold. I'm not sure if you caught this, but in his hair, he had like gold flecks dyed into it. And this was before he had the ridiculous beards as well. So, towards the end of it, he was really leading into that like anime boss sort of stuff. But in this, he looks like this is a real serious champion. And as I said, it's become an iconic image for good reasons. PAC sort of marches down. It's an interesting contrast. PAC like sort of marches down, and OC has his friends, but then of course Kenny Omega, the ultimate boss, coming out with those championships. And as the bell rings, like the dynamic of the match is established immediately, with PAC like advancing straight at Omega and going straight for Omega, and then the champ sort of backing up into the ropes, throwing Bryce Remsburg in the way of PAC, and then using that split-second distraction to cheap shot Orange Cassidy. It's like a really intelligent way to start things off and like set the pace and the tone and clearly outline the character motivations.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. It's because this is where I think it deserves quite a bit of credit, actually, because the storytelling in the ring really has to make up for the lack of storytelling coming in.
Yeah.
So that they have to make those dynamics pretty clear pretty quickly, and I think they only get better as the sort of match progresses.
Yep. And that sort of setup continues as PAC and Omega immediately trade. They start trading, and they're like equal. You'd almost call like an equality in the ring. They're like different versions of the same thing. It's emphasized with them doing mirror spots off the ropes. Like Kenny goes for a V trigger, PAC goes for a pump kick, and it ends in dual running crossbodies, and that allows Orange Cassidy to sort of calmly just stroll in and make the least urgent looking cover on each of them, and both of them kick out at one. This absolutely enrages both men. I love that like character dynamic there. It's such a like whiplash moment. That crossbody that they do is brutal. Like, it is absolutely brutal. And then it's amazing that you can turn that around and have your comedic element just stroll on in and almost take the piss, but everyone loves it, and it is kind of, it does, I don't know, it sort of levels things back out again. It's because you've just had a very intense rally. Didn't really actually think of it like that until you just sort of pointed out. But yeah, it's cool. Yeah, it's amazing stuff, isn't it? But I like the psychology of what Orange Cassidy is doing, because if you haven't listened to it, if you want to get Orange Cassidy, watch the PAC versus Orange Cassidy match, and then cheap plug, listen to the podcast I did way back at the start of all of this, with the implications, where we talk about Orange Cassidy. Orange Cassidy, he is a trickster, he is a prankster, but he is a very skilled wrestler. And what he does is he sets traps, and he does things to trip up wrestlers. And what he's doing in this moment, when he puts these light pins on, he's making Omega and PAC take him lightly. He's trying to get them to think that they can kill each other, and he isn't going to capitalize. And as we'll see later in the match, he is planning to capitalize, but he wants to make them think that they can forget about him. They can not take him seriously, that they can take him as a joke and it won't matter for them, when in fact, it could be the ending for them. If they let their guard down for a split second, he will jump in and he will take advantage. I love that. And, you've got the absolute other end of that, which is PAC, who's just like this straight killer who, there's no false airs about him at all. He just goes straight for Omega. Everything is full on. Everything is just like all out going for the kill. And then I feel like Kenny was almost like a bit in between the two. Like he's almost a weird combination of the two in that like he's got the athleticism, but he's got a bit of goofiness about him.
Yeah, definitely. And I was just thinking while you brought up Kenny, the whole time as well, I should have mentioned this earlier, but all I could think about was like his vertigo and like all his injuries, and he's taking, like he still had so long to go in that title run. Do you know what I mean? Like, I was just like, all I could think about is like, man, I can't believe he's doing it in the state that he is in. Yeah, in terms of, as I sort of talking about before, I think this is the match about Orange Cassidy more than anything. To me, this is the end of his 2-year story, and it basically encompasses like what you're talking about. But like, essentially, if you think about it, like in kayfabe, it's a guy like the real. I can't even think of the guy who plays Orange Cassidy's, what his real name is, but it's a guy that is never really going to be champion, but is a really good wrestler, but he can't make that cut through. So he comes up with this, he becomes a trickster, like he becomes like a real psychological, like that's a psychological weapon, is basically lulling people into false senses of security so they get complacent, or angering people, like, and getting them really frustrated. And so I love that essentially this match, like if you think about that, this first match that PAC and Orange Cassidy had at Revolution, I feel like that was him, taking his shot. He's like, I've managed to get enough attention. I've managed to get to this point. And I think I can get under this guy's skin, and I'm going to eventually force a match, and I'm going to win it and go on to great things, and I will become champion type thing. But he doesn't win. It's kind of like, oh, okay, I couldn't quite beat him, but he's drawn enough attention, so it moves into sort of that second chapter where he has Jericho, as you mentioned before, who really elevates him, and he's basically got to take any chance that he could get to have another go at the championship. And so he just keeps going away, ticking up, he's getting better, he's winning more, and finally he gets into the situation where he's meeting PAC again. And so ultimately PAC beating him didn't actually even help. It's kind of like this redemption arc, like tapped in. He's like, hey, I'm here anyway, even though you beat me. And then they go into this match, and he's, is this guy actually going to become champion? And they do their best to make you think that before, no, this is the end of his story. Realistically, as you alluded to before, he's not really the very top of the card, but we can make an interesting story using his character.
The first real big spot of the match, we'll come back to Orange Cassidy later.
Underdog Fantasy is the fastest growing fantasy app and easiest place to play fantasy sports. Just jump on UnderdogFantasy.com or download the app, draft your team, and that's it. And if drafts aren't your thing, they also have a pick'em game where you can win 20 times your money in a single night. Use promo code RADIO, and Underdog will double your first deposit when you sign up with up to $100 in bonus cash. Deposit $100, get $100 free. That's promo code RADIO. Terms and conditions apply.
Should say.
Sorry,
when we're talking about the legacy.
Sorry.
No, I like what you've said there. But I do think there's an interesting conversation to be had around him. Like, could he ever hold a championship? And we'll put a pin on that as something that we'll come back to down the line. The first real big spot of the match goes to PAC. He hits a moonsault to the outside on Omega. We also get to see, of course, with these three wrestlers in there, you're going to get some really cool athletics. But we get like Kenny's Terminator dive onto both men, and then he like sort of goes straight into the barricades off the top of it all. PAC hits a 450 splash onto Kenny and Orange Cassidy as those two are like chain wrestling and doing different pinning attempts. PAC leaping over the top turnbuckle to hit an avalanche belly to back suplex on Kenny before Orange Cassidy hits a pocket assisted senton where he's going off the edge onto PAC on the outside. And then, of course, you do get the awesome Black Arrow So a lot of really impressive stuff from PAC in this match. What was your favorite of sort of either these moments or just another one that pops up in your mind?
My favorite moment was definitely the very first instance where Cassidy, I can't remember which sequence it was that you just described, but basically PAC has done all the work and he's just about to pin Omega, and out of nowhere, Cassidy comes in and just throws him off with way more energy than he's shown all match and goes for the pin. I loved it. I thought that was so brilliant.
Yeah. That in like the end, that's like kind of coming up to the ending stretch and he hurls him out, like absolutely hurls him out. I love some things that like I didn't mention there, but that I do love. I love how Orange Cassidy sells. Like all of these men just throw themselves around like they're ping pongs. But because Orange Cassidy is so slight, he just folds his body and bends his body in such contorted ways that like the pain you see that he's in, particularly when someone's got like a submission hold on him or someone suplexed him or something, it's really visceral because he is, a relatively thin and lean guy. That really contrasts with, the hard-hitting nature of Kenny and PAC. Like Kenny, his offense is like all strikes and slams. Like his offense is all built around his power, built around his big strikes, particularly his big chops and suplexes and slams. And then there are a few dives as well, which, as you said, like it's funny that people think that Kenny Omega is like an aerial wrestler, a high flyer. And to be fair, he was a lot more so back when he was a junior, a light heavyweight wrestler back in, the early 2010s and was wrestling, matches with Kota Ibushi and in the junior division in New Japan or as a tag in the Golden Lovers tag team in New Japan and DDT. He was much more high flying, but particularly as a heavyweight, like his arsenal of strikes and slams is real. It's just really pleasing to watch, and he executes so well.
Yeah, exactly. Technically Jericho was a high flyer, 20 years ago. High flyer was a bit different back then, but for sure. That
was like he does a suicide dive. Oh, he must be a high flyer. Now everyone does.
He does the lion salt off like the second rope, and it's like, holy crap! Did you see that? He jokes about that himself. I think. I'm sure I read something from him basically saying the exact same thing. It's just so confusing to me because as you say, as a hero, he's so good at delivering stiff shots, but also not stiff shots that make a great sound. Whether that's slapping the leg or whatever. And I know that's a real controversial thing, but I don't.
Sounds really good. Why would you not?
Yeah, I was. You know what's so funny is I didn't even notice for the longest time because I was such a mark. I was looking at the face getting hit, and I didn't even I was like, "How can you see that?" And they're like, "Well, move your eyes 1 inch to the left." I was like, "Oh right, yeah." But no, it's and the camera works great as well because it'll change sides when he's about to get hit in the face with a V trigger, and it's all. It looks sickening like a lot of the time. It looks freaking horrible, and the sounds really go with it, and I'm like, this Kenny Omega's a brutal wrestler, and it's something I don't think people necessarily appreciate sometimes. Anyway, so I don't think I added anything to what you just said, but that's
all good. It all adds something. In terms of the actual structure of this match, like three-way matches or triple threats, as it's more commonly known, it is a weird sort of match style because wrestling is built around one-on-one confrontations. And so it's difficult to get three, if you've got 4 people in a match, then you can just have 2 lots of one-on-one. But if you've got 3 people or 5 people sometimes, I guess, but 3 people is more common. It does require certain trade-offs that you don't normally do. And it's sort of emerged that there's like 2 different structures of triple threat matches. There's what I would call like the most traditional structure in terms of what's become most common. And that was really exemplified by the WrestleMania 20 match with HBK, Triple H, and Benoit. You've got 3 sort of really equal wrestlers doing a lot of doing things together. There's often, like one person, there's a one-on-one, one person comes in, they swap around, and then it's one-on-one, and then the other person comes in, and they sort of trade places that way. But it's positioned as like 3 equal wrestlers all wrestling on equal terms for the most part. But then there's another style of triple threat, which has become more common lately, where you've got like one guy who is just like this absolute monster who 2 people have to gang up on and get to try and take out. And then they just wrestle like hell to try and beat each other until the other one comes back. The place where I'd say it was, I guess, popularized would be the Seth Rollins, John Cena, and Brock Lesnar triple threat at the 2015 Royal Rumble. And that's sort of been used, of course, a lot in like the Brock Lesnar multi-man matches, and also like the Shield triple threat match when they did that at Battleground 2016. That was sort of wrestled like that with Roman Reigns playing in like the monster role. And you've seen various iterations of that taking place. And this one's sort of, it's almost like a weird amalgamation of the two, because at times Orange Cassidy is kind of playing the guy who's off on the side, but he is far from being a monster. Like, he's not Brock Lesnar, but he's off on the side just because of the reason of just the way that his gimmick works. He's almost voluntarily off on the side in that position. But as I said, like, these are three wrestlers who are put on relatively even footing, particularly Kenny Omega and PAC. So I'm curious what you think of how this match was structured.
Yeah, it's a tough one to answer, because I've never been a big fan of triple threat matches for a lot of the sort of reasons you sort of covered, in terms of like that predictability. Like, they were always kind of like this, you're kind of limited with what you can do here in terms of believability. Like, there's going to be a big spot where someone is incapacitated, so you can get one-on-one. It's kind of like in a movie when a group attacks someone. Thank you for attacking me one at a time. Like, that's really, I'm glad that I'm only having to there's 2 wrestlers I'm facing, but I'm only having to face one at a time. And so I've always kind of thought they were not lazy, but like restricting, I suppose. And that really sort of limited the variety. So I was not that excited when it was announced for that reason, as I was kind of like, well, AEW does a lot of near falls anyway, and these just going to be really close near falls, but with dives instead. But I think they did a really good job of is the third, like, the final sort of stretch of it. I think that last sort of, I don't know, sort of 5 to 10 minutes builds up so fast to such an interesting crescendo, even to, it's nothing to do with triple threat match, but just the small details like Callis freaking out on the commentary. And I think they basically built everything towards that final ramping up in intensity. And because of that, I think I don't know, I really love that attention to the ending, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say.
You said this is a match that's almost like about Orange Cassidy. And I really think you're right in that, like, as I said, he's the X factor in this match. And almost like if this match has succeeded, if people buy into Orange Cassidy's potential to win it. And, he's the one that takes the most punishment. He takes stacks of V-triggers and suplexes. But that only makes the audience like pop harder when he gets his hands in his pockets and finally fires up. And he has a great fire up as well, because he does so much slow. When he explodes and moves so quickly, it's really easy to get wrapped up in that and just have your mind blown a little bit, because you're seeing this guy who's previously moved quite slowly and lackadaisically just explode across the ring. And, like when he gets the big near falls, he gets one off a brain buster to PAC. He gets an even bigger one when he does that. As you said, there's that moment where PAC does like an avalanche Falcon Arrow on Omega, and then Orange Cassidy just like inserts himself and throws PAC out of the ring, which is, it's perfect. Like an avalanche Falcon Arrow is one of those moves where you kind of have to hurt yourself a little bit to deliver it. And so it's a perfect moment for him to capitalize on that. And he gets a near fall, and then he immediately hits a beach break on Omega after that. And the crowd, like, I think that's when the crowd bites. I think they think that he could have won it at that point. Because as we said, like, going into this match, logically, and AEW is a smart crowd. Like, it's not a bunch of kids who, and I'm not saying that derisively, but like, it's a smart crowd. It's a crowd that going in they would have been like saying, of course Kenny Omega's going to win. But if in the moment you can just buy it emotionally, even just for a second, holy shit, they're going to do it. That's that they've got you. And that's like, if this match succeeds, if you get that match, I do think the crowd, and I know I sort of bought it when they hit the beach break on Omega.
Yeah, and totally. And that's one of the things I think they do just so well, and that sort of final crescendo. And this is one of the reasons I think I love it. And perhaps I'm just too nice on it because of it. But there's not only the idea, like, getting back to Orange Cassidy, there's also, I suppose, the idea that, like, it's not even necessarily that you have to believe that he could win. It's more that you can believe that Kenny is going to find it too hard to overcome 1 in 3 odds as opposed to 1 in 2 odds. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to be like, because he doesn't have to get pinned. So it's not even so much that he can win it as much as he can get really lucky. And given that he's actually this guy that has his hands in his pockets as a gimmick, has managed to play his way to a title match, and he actually now has an opportunity to become world champion. I think that's a really cool element. The other detail that I think is just worth noting is you sometimes forget is how integral the referees are to a lot of this action. And it's interesting because you think of the referees as being reactive, right? Like, the wrestler does something, they count 1, 2, the wrestler kicks out and you pull your hand away, essentially. But you can tell in this one, the referee's leading, they're going like 1, 2, and basically they've been told, Bryce, on 3, you just keep going until you're about 2 centimeters away from the mat, and that's when you stop and do a pull, and we'll sort out the rest. And it doesn't matter really, because he's committed to getting the hand there, like just off the ground, and making it really dramatic. It doesn't matter if it doesn't sync up properly. It just adds so much to that near fall. And it baited me. I actually was like, holy crap, I'm doing this mental Rolodex thing going, well, hold on, maybe they will give it to him. Why would they give it to him? What's the potential? Where's that going to like you start like scattering, and you're like, oh my God, I think they might actually do it. Incredible. That's it doesn't happen often. As I said to you before, like, we're so jaded. We're like smart's a nice way to say it. Like, jaded. It's hard to actually be like
getting that sense
this
of peril.
Is a genuine surprise. And they did it, and that's why I think it's just incredible.
Yeah. And like the ultimate ending sequence is a story of that, like that sense of peril. Or Don Callis on commentary, he's yucking it up the whole time. He's just talking about how great he is, how great Kenny Omega is. But then as things get like more and more, he starts, getting a bit worried, and it climaxes in Orange Cassidy hitting PAC and Omega with orange punches, and he just yells shit, and then runs off the mic, and the commentary team's like, what is going here? And he pulls the ref out as Orange Cassidy goes to pin PAC, and there's giant like big "fuck you, Don" chants that go up as Orange Cassidy starts like headbutt Kenny Omega, which I love. Yeah. When have you ever seen Orange Cassidy headbutt someone? Like, this is like the whole idea is like, this is a guy who doesn't try, and but he's like so in the moment. He's just doing the most visceral thing you can think of, which is whack someone with his head. And then PAC manages to get OC in the brutalizer. Kenny then takes out Bryce Remsburg before hitting PAC with like the production line of belt shots. He gets 1, he gets 2, using up all the championship belts on PAC to take the Englishman out. But even then, like, Orange Cassidy manages to blindside Kenny Omega with another orange punch. But by the time Aubrey Edwards like rushes out to try and make the count, she only gets a 2 count. And Kenny is able to reverse that into a crucifix and get the 3 count and the win. What a cool ending sequence. What did you think of it?
I mean, it's one of my favorites. I was trying not to laugh, like, listening to your recap, because the Don Callis bit is
it's hilarious.
One of my favorite pieces of commentary ever. He is so good. It's like you legit think something has like, oh man, I've just got a text from my wife saying my kid's been in an accident or something. The panic in his voice is outstanding. And I love the pulling out of the referee, as he's going in for the count, and him just standing there going 2, 2, 2. It's like, yeah, well, it is 2 because you pulled me out of the ring. It's so good. It's so clever, and it's again, keeping in mind the sort of fan theory I have of this being the end of the, this Orange Cassidy story. They give him everything, don't they? Like, he is the visual winner, isn't he? They really do their best to put him, I mean, he's already over, but you know what I'm trying to say, like to make it clear that no, he's the winner of this match, but just he's not going to win the belt or the match.
Yeah.
It's cool. Callous, the Aubrey Edwards running out, like, the ridiculous run she has where she's in the arms are like the Terminator.
Yeah.
You know what I'm trying to say, right? The reference I'm trying to make.
And the belt shot after belt shot, like the just like paying off all the championships he's won.
It's brilliant. Yeah. So no, I think it's just there's not much more to be said. Love it, absolutely love it.
Even just with the belt shots, like the fact they leave the AEW one to the end, and Kenny Omega's like, "Yeah, give me the big one, the big one." Like that's the one that takes him down. It's great, yeah.
Kenny's character, just going way back to earlier in the show, like just nerd douchebag. It's like just trying so hard to be in a fraternity, but like the fraternities won't let him in because of his his anime books that he's carrying around or something. Like anime books he's carrying. Oh my god, show how bad I am. Anime DVDs or something.
Yeah, he's like a parody of an 80s or 90s wrestling champ.
Yeah.
In terms of what he is, like mixed with like an anime villain.
Mixed with also like humorless driven tunnel vision focused athlete.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna, I'm like an old timer wrestler, except there's no way I'm touching a cigarette or alcohol, none of that kind of stuff, like that real driven, insanely dedicated to training.
Yeah. So look, overall, you've said you really love this match. Watching it back, I was like, oh yeah, this is a really good match. But I was like thinking, I wonder, why do I forget this match? Like, why is this, when we did the match guide, it came in 17th. And I think one of the reasons it came in 17th was because we did it so soon after Double or Nothing. At the time, people were high on this match. But I think if we rerun the poll today and said only the same matches can be entered in, so the first 2 years, I don't think it would do as well. I don't think that people remember this. My theory is, I'm curious what you think of this. My theory is that it didn't really progress things as much for the other people in it. As say like your other pay-per-view title matches that Jericho and Moxley had, or even like Omega and Moxley had, where you've got it ending with Eddie Kingston coming out and reuniting with Mox. Or I'm thinking like with the Moxley run, you've got what happens after Brody Lee. Brody Lee goes out and he goes on to become the TNT champion after beating Mox. Same with Darby Allin. He goes on to become the TNT champion. Like Cody, after he got beaten by Jericho, he goes on to have this blood feud with MJF. And nothing really happened with Orange Cassidy and PAC afterwards. And this didn't really have an effect on Kenny Omega's character either. It was kind of just like waltzed on through and he just continued on his glorious reign. That's my theory. I'm curious what you think of it, given that I think you're really high on this match and I think potentially a little bit higher than me.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think what it is as well is I actually agree with everything you've said. I don't think there's any chance this would rank as high as 17th. I don't know if it would rank as high as 17th this year, if you put it on this. Okay, I'm being very facetious, but what I think is why I'm so high on it is for the match itself.
Yeah.
And if you take into those other considerations, like the program leading into it and the follow-on and that kind of stuff, it is forgettable. That's the simple truth of the matter. It is a bit of a throwaway. I think what it is that it's the match itself that I'm high on. I think that they took that complacency and made you, pushed it to its limits. Do you know what I mean? Like really made people believers in something that they knew they shouldn't believe in. And it's for the progression that, this is the end of the Orange Cassidy story. This is his, because he's not, it's like Rocky meets Andy Kaufman. Like this is his ending, is that, he doesn't beat Apollo Creed. Like, it's just that Orange Cassidy hasn't had like 6 sequels. So they're starting in Orange Cassidy 2. I just don't know where that's going at the moment, because they haven't really done a lot with him since, have they? Like,
no.
Yeah, and no, it's pretty it's pretty uneventful for him at the minute, and it's curious to see if there's a development in terms of, okay, this, if you go kayfabe, well, this gimmick isn't going to really work anymore because everyone's wise to it. Does it mean there's a change, or do they stick with it for a while?
Yeah.
I'm very curious. The stuff, with the best friends is interesting at the. Oh, I suppose it's Anyway, like in terms of what's happening in the programming now, with Wheeler Yuta and stuff. It's kind of like he's really fine. And PAC's you touched on it before, Like it's that part of it's his own deal living in the UK. It's really hard to push, and that's how he gets into the death triangle, which is kind of like, oh, okay, a Geordie luchador, that's fine. I don't know what their background necessarily is, like if you're, but okay, that's cool. They're and then Phoenix and Penta are just going to tag, and they're going to be the champions, so they're going to have their own thing. You know what I'm trying to say. Like it's so kind of inconsistent, and by the nature of that Kenny story that was going on, it was a hiccup, wasn't it? It wasn't. It didn't impact it because it wasn't meant to. There was other stuff to be focused on there. You had to have a title defense, I suppose, but his bigger challenges were still to come.
I think what this match does do, and this is what I'll say about it, is it is a bloody good time. Like, it's a fun match. And I think a lot of, looking back at Double or Nothing 2021, just about all of the matches are that. Like, what match, the only match I can think of on that card that had like long-term consequences was the Britt Baker and Hikaru Shida match. Like, everything else was like just a real good rollicking time. And you know what? That's all that pay-per-view needed to be. Like, that pay-per-view was going to be a landmark event regardless of what they did, because it was the return of live crowds to AEW. And that crowd was just so pleased to be there. And all you needed to do them was give them a bloody good time. Like, I'm thinking Hangman Page and Brian Cage. Like, what really came from that? Not a lot. There was sort of that kind of had an impact on what was going on with Brian Cage within Team Taz, but like what's really ultimately eventuated from that. Brian Cage isn't on TV anymore.
I mean, or Hangman got his win back. That's what it was really. Like,
like Bucks versus, this was my favorite match on the show, Bucks versus Mox and Eddie. Incredible match, awesome match. Yeah. But like, what does it mean? Not a lot. It was just a bloody good time. Even Stadium Stampede 2, like that was the midpoint of the feud for these guys, and it was just like a really fun time.
Well, 100% agree, and it was a celebration of wrestling and like of a live atmosphere.
That's all it needed to be,
and that's all it needed to be, and that's why, this match delivers in terms of exactly. It is a rollicking good time. It plays with your expectations, and it's so entertaining. And there's a few. The Stadium Stampede, like. You did right. They didn't have to do anything, but I loved the ending to Stadium Stampede, like where they bring it from it back into the ring. Like no more cinematic matches where like this is our way of Dorothy transitioning from black and white to color. Like, imagine if
they put that on first. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened, but that could have been like, because I mean, the storyteller in me is like that they were already back. Like, this is not the return. Like. Obviously, you're not gonna pragmatically, you're not gonna like deny this voracious crowd who is like chomping at the bit. You're not gonna deny them for half an hour so you can have like this artsy thing. But like storytelling wise, man, that could have been.
No, I know what you said. No, for sure.
Moving beyond like Double or Nothing and sort of into, I guess, more nebulous talk. Where do you think this rates amongst Kenny's defenses?
In terms of match, that's such
in AEW. We'll just say in AEW because there was the TNA stuff and the AAA stuff, but within AEW,
I'd say it's probably near the bottom. Unfortunately, even though it's an amazing match, just because of all the periphery stuff around it. In terms of the matches, I think I think the dark horse of those ones is his match against Phoenix on Dynamite. That kind of gets forgotten because it was on TV. But I'd I suppose place it near the bottom.
If just to go against just to put it against the other pay-per-view matches, would you have it?
Yeah. How many would
you yourself?
Yes.
Would you have it? And I'll tell you what I would do after you go. But would you have it above
Sweet
or
as.
below Mox Omega, the exploding barbed wire death match?
Yeah,
you'd have this one above.
Yeah, above. Yeah.
I'd have the death match above it personally. Yeah, you can find out why by listening to the podcast about cheap fuck.
Yeah. Nice.
This versus Christian at All Out.
This definitely.
Yeah, I'd be the same. Honestly, I think their best match was the one before it. If you include like the 5 minutes, the 5 minute post match, I don't know, maybe that's like the best match of the best moment of AEW history.
Yeah.
Then
Christian A, what a soldier.
Yeah.
Just like
Oh man.
Oh, well.
Yeah. It was, that's another good match, but not one that's going to be remembered in the history books. Yeah. And then of course this match versus Hangman Page, I think we'll both be in agreement that
yes.
that one is well above this.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Do you think this was, we sort of talked about actually this already with Orange Cassidy and this being sort of like an end point for him or something of a full stop for him, a point for his character. But do you think this is the pinnacle for PAC and Orange Cassidy in AEW?
Yeah, I don't want to get crucified. I don't think that there's, look, I love Orange Cassidy, but I don't necessarily, you never say never in wrestling, but I don't think he, as it stands in this iteration, should be champion. And
best in small doses, I think.
Yeah. Unless he does come up with some radical evolution that makes it fresh and interesting again. But I don't rush that. As you say, the key is small doses. And PAC, like I think PAC is an extraordinary talent, and I really like him. But yeah, unless he fully committed to being in the States, I think this is as high as he'll. I think he had a really strong start, and that's basically that. Up to here is basically his peak. And I'm not really sure what's next for him, to be honest.
Yeah, I think like I could early on in AEW, I could see PAC as a potential AEW champion. Not anymore, just given the talent that's come in. And I think both would do very strong TNT title runs. And I think that would be realistic for both of them. But, like the amount of wrestlers that AEW has that could have really good TNT title runs is like a giant, it's like a clown car. Whereas people just falling out left and right. Like that
is one of those problems with like it is a big roster, and it's 100% at the start of things when PAC is beating Kenny Omega, like he's the top guy almost, like definitely. But now it's kind of like, geez, like I mean, probably like, well, there's guys that are there sort of more regularly, and it's not to blame him, but it's just you get more exposure to them, and that I don't know, that it's just more impressive at the moment.
I mean, early on, PAC. This was PAC's record early on. He beat Kenny Omega. He wrestled John Moxley to a TV time limit draw, and he beat Hangman Page. That's incredible. That is insane. That is so high.
He's beaten two of the 4 champions and tied with the other one.
Yeah.
While in AEW. Yeah, that's remarkable now that you've just listed it like that. That's incredible.
But like I don't think, for various reasons. And as we said, like both of us early on, big fans of PAC, and not just his in-ring work, which we could wax lyric about all day, but his promos and everything as well. He is very much a complete package, but I don't know, it's just never really hit full pace except for that early run. Since COVID happened, he just hasn't been able to get that same momentum. Even though he has had good matches, like the matches against Andrade were mint, really great wrestling.
Oh, they were amazing. Yeah. I mean, there's another guy that would have a great TNT title run. Like potentially world champion, like the big title. Like he's certainly got the talent for it, but where do you put him in that line? It's interesting. Sorry, I was going to be silly. All I was going to say was that I've never seen a wrestler that suits his nickname more than PAC has the bastard. That is just that's his character. He's a bastard. Like it's amazing.
You know what I think Orange Cassidy's ultimate destination should be, and I'm not sure when this is going to happen, If they don't do it, they're absolute idiots. The FTW Championship. Who is more FTW than Orange Cassidy? And the belt is orange. The belt is orange.
Oh man, long-term booking. That's why they brought it in. It's all leading to it, man. That's where it ends. Holy crap.
Okay. You got this. You heard it here first. You heard it here first, guys. The belt is orange. Come on.
Yeah. That's it.
I saw. We've got vision here, and I saw Bevan's eyes light up when I mentioned that. He had a light bulb.
Yeah. It's one of the best ideas I've heard. It's perfect. Yeah.
Look, last question I've got written down. It's more just generally about triple threat matches. It's not something that AEW's done a lot of. They haven't done a lot of multi-man matches except for multi-man gimmick matches. What do you think their place is in AEW? And do you think they should do more? If so, is there anyone in particular you think would work well in it, or where do you think they should fit for AEW?
Yeah, I'm not, as sort of touched upon earlier, I'm not a fan. So for me personally, very infrequently is enough. They can have another one again soon, maybe, but it's not my cup of tea because as all those reasons we touched upon earlier, it's
you
hard
have
to do sort of it's a
the
format.
signature moves which suddenly start knocking people out for 2 minutes when previously they would get up. Yeah,
and it's asking a lot to do that regularly, basically. You're asking a lot of suspension of disbelief, but if you do it once every 18 months or something like that, or 2 years, and you've got guys that are doing amazing work and things like that to distract you, you can fall into that kind of thing, and that's what's kind of good about it. So I've had my fill with this one, to be honest. I'm in no rush to see another one.
I certainly they've done them for the TNT, they've done them for the women's. But I certainly think if you want to have big matches, you book one-on-one matches. Unless there's certain things, like the only one that I can think is this was a triple threat that everyone was dreaming of is the Shield triple threat. But that's because it was the 3 people in the group. So that's an inbuilt story there. Most of the time, I mean, do we get the Elite triple threat? Is that ever going to happen? But I'm sure they would put on an incredible match if they ever did it.
Amazing.
But when I think big time matches, like big pay-per-view matches for the championship, you want to see it one-on-one. Particularly, or at worst comes to worst, I'd like to see elimination triple threats. So to be the man, you can't just pin someone else and become champion without beating the champion.
And that's exactly it. It's I totally agree. Other stuff, sure, whatevs. But for your big title, it should realistically be one-on-one, basically clean. No, not too much dickery around the ring. That kind of stuff. Obviously,
you can have a bit of that, but you've got to do it well.
It's the heels. It's the heels doing it. Obviously, that's cool. That's whatever. But I totally agree, and the elimination is the only real way you can go, because as I 100% hate that idea that you can lose the title by getting someone else pinned. That's so annoying. You wouldn't have that in real sports. New Zealand didn't get to win the last Cricket World Cup final just because of something Australia did against South Africa. You know what I mean?
They have not won a Cricket World Cup final.
No, we just got screwed by something else. By bad rules.
I'm probably the only person that listens to this podcast that knows that. So
that's fine.
You picked the wrong podcast to say that on.
But I knew I picked the right host. So that's, it's been 3 years and I'm still mourning.
As I said, that's the last question I had for you. Is there anything further you'd like to say about this match or just wrestling in general before you give your plugs and we get out of here?
About this match? No, I think we've covered pretty much everything about wrestling in general.
We're nothing if not exhaustive here at the AEW podcast.
Wrestling in general, man, just the quality at the minute is just astonishing, and it's so much fun. I just watched that the Supercard of Honor, and I mean that it's hard to see matches that live up to the hype, but Briscoe's FTR one.
Yeah,
Man, one of the coolest things I've ever seen.
yeah.
And it's just such a good time. So, keep it. Tribalism's fun, but don't make a personality of it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, you can hate something, but
yeah,
other people are allowed to like it. Don't be a dick. Yeah. So no,
don't be a dick. That's the rule for the internet, right? Like that's the Will Wheaton rule for the internet.
Yeah. And if you want to follow me, on Twitter, I did have a podcast going for a while. We were talking about this off air, which I need to start again, but a lot of other things got in the way, which I think is the story of 90% of podcasters. But I do have a Twitter page called All Elite Aotearoa, so it's just at AE Aotearoa. So that's really helpful if you're not from New Zealand and don't know, and you don't know how to spell it. That's all good. But anyway, so that's my plugs.
Yeah, beautiful. Look, I've really appreciated having you on here. I love following you on Twitter. It's a fun mix of this sort of talk, genuine passion and fandom. There is a bit of fun thrown in there, I'll add. But definitely get amongst it. And Bevan also has another great podcast that I'd like to just highlight. It's not a wrestling podcast, but it's one that's very close to my heart, sorry. It's about being a parent. He's a relatively new parent. I think your kid's about 1, and he's gone through the ringer on it. And he's got a lot of really heart-wrenching, but really heartwarming stories to tell and things to say. Certainly as a parent myself of a 3-year-old who's gone through, things like chronic illness and that sort of stuff. It was really cool to listen to a podcast that goes into that sort of stuff. And that's called Offspring.
It is, yeah. Yes. I've had a few inquiries be like, so it's not about the band?
No, not the Offspring.
Yeah. No, just Offspring. Like the Australian TV show. There was an Aussie TV show, wasn't there?
Yes, there was. That's
true. Yeah.
I'd highly recommend that podcast, particularly if you're a parent, if you've got kids. I think that's something that's worth having a listen to as well. So definitely go out of your way to have a listen to that. Hopefully you get the Match Guide bump, because I just gave you a plug.
Thanks, man. Cheers.
But yeah, look, and as Bevan said, wrestling's great at the moment. Focus on the great stuff. That's what I love doing here on the AEW Match Guide podcast. I love looking at the things that I love and I'm passionate about. So I'd encourage everyone to do that too. And if you want to get in on that, if you want to tell us what you think of this match, tell us what you thought of Kenny Omega's reign, what you think of the idea of this being Orange Cassidy's sort of the pinnacle or an end point for his career, or the final chapter of his career. Well, not the final chapter of his career, but his progression in AEW. Let us know on Twitter. You can find me, Sir_Samuel, and the link for that will also be in the description. But aside from that, thank you very much for listening. If you have enjoyed what you've listened to today, you can rate and subscribe us on your podcast app of choice. And you can also support us financially on Red Circle. You go to redcircle.com /AEW Match Guide or /Social Suplex. There will be a link in the podcast description. You can actually also support us financially, and that just goes towards paying for things like hosting, equipment, that sort of stuff. It's not like we're making $1 million out here. So anything like that is appreciated. But thank you for listening. Your support is really appreciated. And thank you also, Bevan, for popping on today. I've had an absolute blast chatting to you about this match.
Thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun, and really appreciate your kind words about Offspring. Really appreciate it, mate. And I love I like your attitude, both online and in the podcast. It's nice there's a lot of toxicity at wrestling, and it's nice to just have a place in a podcast and things like that where you celebrate the good. It's awesome.
Cheers. Well, thank you very much, man. I appreciate that as well. But if you have enjoyed it, you can always catch us again next week. We'll be looking at another one of AEW's greatest matches in exhaustive and fantastic detail. And I cannot wait to see you again. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the AEW Match Guide podcast. If you enjoyed the show, then you can subscribe on the podcast app of your choice so you never miss an episode. Also, feel free to let me know on Twitter at Sir_Samuel. I'd love to hear from you. The AEW Match Guide podcast is brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network, where you can find many other fantastic podcasts discussing not just AEW, but all parts of the world of professional wrestling. Looking forward to seeing you again next week. I'm Sam Brown.
Underdog Fantasy is the fastest growing fantasy app and easiest place to play fantasy sports. Just jump on UnderdogFantasy.com or download the app, draft your team, and that's it. And if drafts aren't your thing, they also have a pick'em game where you can win 20 times your money in a single night. Use promo code RADIO, and Underdog will double your first deposit when you sign up with up to $100 in bonus cash. Deposit $100, get $100 free. That's promo code RADIO. Terms and conditions apply.